Thanks very much for being here. Thanks for coming to what is definitely what looks to be a subject that is dear to a lot of people's hearts today. The session here is entitled The Founders Challenge, Scaling Whilst Keeping the Vision Alive. And I think that that is something that is a challenge for any organization, whether you are a social entrepreneurial venture, whether you are a publicly listed company, a family business, or whatever. And the challenge there is, how do you actually morph and keep that essence of the founder's vision whilst responding to the changing context in which that organization is finding itself. Now, I have to say that two of our panelists were unable to be here. One because of a health problem at the last minute, and the other because his client, one of his major clients, had an emergency. But we can talk about that as well. But we're joined, and then the good sense, though, is that we have a lot more time. I have to confess that as sort of the architect of this session, I was extremely worried that we were 6 panelists, incredible experience, and we were going to be very packed in terms of time, and not have time for the wonderful, audience participation that I think we all look forward to. So I want to really introduce each one of these, even though you have their bios. I want to introduce what is very special about each one of our panelists up here in alphabetical order. I'm Pamela Hartigan. I run the Skoll Center here at the Said Business School at Oxford. This issue of founder's vision, succession planning, is something that has been very dear to my heart, perhaps because I'm getting older as well. But anyway, as we all are. ANDREA Coleman is the co-founder of Riders for Health, and she and her husband Barry have been working for 20 years to ensure that health workers in Africa have access to reliable transportation. The organization now has programs in 7 countries across Africa and improves access to health care for over 12 million people. Riders has developed systems for training their health workers on how to do daily checks on their own vehicles, and for technicians to travel out and service those vehicles that they operate. And Andrea and I have had, and Barry, her co-founder, have had many, and her husband, which is an interesting idea in and of itself, have had many, many discussions about this very issue. So I'm delighted that she's here. CHERYL DORSEY is president of Echoing Green and has seen the evolution of that organization from its inception to really become one of the most recognized and respected entities that identifies social entrepreneurs worldwide. The organization was founded in 1987 by the leadership and investment of Atlantic Partners, which is one of the leading growth equity firms in the United States. And since then, Echoing Green has provided nearly 600 promising social entrepreneurs working in over 40 countries with $33 million in startup funding, and really customized their support services. So CHERYL herself is an Echoing Green Fellow, graduate of Harvard Medical School, and she might be able to tell us a little bit more about how much that whole organization has morphed in a very interesting way. Wendy KOPP, co-founder and chair of Teach for America, co-founder and CEO of Teach for All. Wendy started Teach for America in 1989, and since then she's mobilized more than, or the organization, I want to take it away from the heropreneur, it's the organization, have reached more than 3 million children, and they've been sustained their commitment through, as alumni working in education and across all sectors. Wendy co-founded Teach for All, which is a global network committed to ensuring educational excellence and equity by accelerating the impact of its current 32 national organizations that are adapting the Teach for America model to their own contexts. And Subramanian Ramadori came of age as a professional when getting to work on a mainframe computer was considered the epitome of career advancement. He became the chief executive and managing director of Tata Consulting Services in 1966, when the company's turnover was $155 million a year, and it had 6,000 employees. And by the time his tenure was ended although your tenure's never ended, Ram, anyway, in October of 2009, revenues at TCS, now a publicly traded company, climbed to $6 billion, making it one of India's most profitable companies. It has 143,000 professionals. Currently, Ram is the vice chairman at TCS. He's chairman of Tata Elxsi, Tata Technologies, CMC, on the board of Tata Industries and non-Tata companies as chairman, and he's chairman of the National Skill Development Agency. He also advises the Indian Prime Minister on skill development, and I'd love to know what he does in his spare time. Anyway, I want to start with Ram because while he's not a founder, he really has been very close to the Tatas. Ram, tell us a little bit about how you actually came into that situation, how you came to be in your position, and exactly what that position entails vis-a-vis the Tata family.
I think just for everyone's background, the Tata Group is about a 146-year-old institution, and the founder, Jamshedji Tata, the simple message was, our purpose in the Tata Group is to improve the quality of life in the communities which we serve. That's a very, very simple and a powerful message which was given in 1868, and we have practiced that across the group companies. Second point I just wanted to drive home is the ownership of the group itself, the Tata Sons. 66% of the ownership is by charitable trusts, which are completely independently managed without any family presence other than representing on the board. Every single company is headed by professionals and are independently listed in their own right and driven by professionals, and some of us had that opportunity to come back way back when we had no reason to come back because we had an excellent job in the US. We had the promise of a green card. Everyone thought I was mad to come back to India because nothing was happening in the technology space. But that's the kind of disruption you believe in and you want to make a change, and when you get an opportunity with a firm like the Tata Group, very few people think of that as an opportunity to try something which nobody has done. I think the journey to excellence within the consulting group, which I joined in 1972, has been to build the whole technology, information technology, as a forefront of operations out of India, and the total turnover of the country as a whole is more than $100 billion today, and each of the companies in the group are profitable in this space. When we came back, computers were foreign to the country, unaffordable from a cost point of view, from a duty point of view, but the single raw material around which we worked was the human capital and the human resource to give opportunities for young professionals across, and then relate to the Western markets to start with, because that's where technology was available, technology was used, and we could relate to the technology through the professionals which we have. Today what we have created, we went public in the year 2004, we have created a corporation of about $12 billion, close to 300,000 professionals that are working from all over the world. 94% of the revenues are global in nature, only 6% comes from India, and we generate a net operating margin of about 27%. The market value of the corporation is about $60 to $70 billion on a given day. But then the money we spend on social responsibilities, whether it's education, vocational education, skills, healthcare, or anything to do with the community, is ingrained in our DNA. So when you look at some of these things where you have an opportunity to shape, build an institution, it's no different from a founder, except that your responsibility, the stakeholder commitment and the responsibility which you hold is extremely critical, and that's what drives us the most. We take a technology not to solve only customers' problems, but we use the same technology for social innovation as well. Examples, adult literacy as an example. We have built some software and platforms where a single adult who is completely illiterate can read or write within 40 hours. Ability to read, ability to at least understand newspaper in multiple languages as an example. We have built the skilling platforms or education platforms which are completely digital in nature. Similarly, any delivery of services, whether it is healthcare, whether it is social impact initiatives, we drive technology as an ingredient to make effective use of everything that is possible. It's only maturing every day in and day out because the technology availability has become so easy now. It's available to everyone through the social medium, through the internet. So our life has become a lot more easier. We encourage volunteering in the company, and as part of the policy initiatives of the Government of India itself, 2% of the net profit of every company over the last 3 years will be spent on what we call as a corporate social responsibility. And on the average, the Tata Group itself spends about $200 million a year on charity or charitable causes, whether they are cancer research institutions, higher learning institutions, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, or sending students abroad for higher education. As we have globalized as a group completely, we do charitable activities or social responsibility activities, including in a very large scale in this country, because both the Jaguar Land Rover as the firm which is owned by us, as well as the Chorus Steel, which is a combination of British Steel and the Netherlands one. I think all of these have really done on the ground, including the data consultancy services. Latin American markets, the same thing, and the US markets, the same thing. But it's ingrained in our DNA. That's what brought me back. And I'm proud to be a part of this institution, which I've been for the last 43 years. That's the background.
Whoa. So what have been the critical challenges to the original vision, if there have been any, in terms of the tensions that the Tatas have had to address as their company grew to this mammoth global firm?
I think number of challenges, because when you are generating cash, the founder or the owner doesn't want to let it go very easily. So whether we should go public or not was one of the greatest deliberations. Finally, we decided to go public in 2004 and then raised $1 billion by offloading 14% of our equity. That was the largest public offering in the country which we have ever seen. Wow. So suddenly the second challenge was from one shareholder, namely Tata Sons, who owned us, to 1.1 million shareholders, of which predominantly most of them were retail. The responsibility for me as a CEO becomes mind-boggling. Where if you are an introvert, if you are not very fond of speaking in public, suddenly you are asked to stand in front of the shareholders every quarter, and once a year in the AGM you are supposed to answer for the next 3 to 4 hours all the questions. It's a very, very daunting task because you carry a responsibility for 1.1 million shareholders. Today we have about 700,000 shareholders because of the consolidation that has taken place. Still, it is a very, very mammoth task of managing 700,000 shareholders. The third challenge was import of technology into the country, where it was prohibitively expensive and the kind of export obligations we had to give. Very few companies would have taken that challenge. Quite a few of them would have folded up and gone away. We had a couple of joint ventures, one with Burroughs, which was the second largest computer company in the early 60s, 70s, then with IBM called Tata IBM. And a lot of people thought the consulting part of it, which I represented, must be folded into these joint ventures. We came very close to folding it into that, but somebody's sense prevailed, and then we decided to leave it alone. That's what is generating the cash today, like I said. I think the challenge of managing 300,000 people. When I joined, we were 100 people. Today, it's 300,000. Then when you had to say, an average age of our employees is 27 years old. When I joined, it was 23. So I think managing a crowd of average 23 or 27 years is the biggest challenge a chief executive can have. So I think I can go on and on, but these are some of the challenges.
Just one quick question. Do you think that if Tata hadn't gone, I mean, do you question whether Tata should have or should have not gone public?
We always question that. We keep asking. A lot of people used to ask me, why didn't you go earlier? All I said was there is a right time for everything. And we never repented because we generated more cash when we went public than if we had done earlier.
Exactly.
We used to get carried away by some of the competitors going public and the brand image they got. Even though we were the number one company, because we were not listed, people always used to think the number two company was the number one company. Today they don't talk about it because now they know our results, our performance, etc., etc. But I think the value systems and the ethics and the founder's vision has been kept alive so well that that's what drives us, not the salary, not the compensation. We don't practice the Western models of compensation. Or the CEO wants to serve for 5 years, collect his booty and run away. That's not the way we operate.
Thank you. CHERYL, since its inception, Echoing Green has really responded to the evolving practice of social entrepreneurship. For example, you were one of the first organizations to really eschew the idea that you were only going to support those ventures that were set up as nonprofits. And you started to really also support what we would call today social business ventures, where a for-profit structure might be more appropriate. And also, initially, Echoing Green, as I recall, way back when, focused only on the USA, entrepreneurs in the USA, and even more narrowly in that, it was Ivy League, right? So how are those changes consistent or not with the original vision of the founders at General Atlantic Partners? How have you managed that?
Well, great question. So first I want to say good morning. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm really privileged to be a part of this incredible panel. And Pamela, thank you so much for inviting me. You've been a really terrific colleague and friend over the years. And I really want to thank you for allowing me to be on this panel because it really allowed me the space to step back and reflect on the incredible journey that is Echoing Green. And I think for my remarks, I'm sort of going to frame it as the Chuck Feeney, Atlantic Philanthropies, General Atlantic, Echoing Green example. So I'll start back in the beginning. So General Atlantic, which is Echoing Green's founding funder, and it is also now a leading global growth equity firm, was actually born in 1980 as a private investment firm to invest the earnings of Atlantic Philanthropies, which was established by Charles or Chuck Feeney. Many of you may be familiar with his name, co-founder of the Duty Free Shoppers Network, as well as one of the leading global philanthropists and one of the early signatories of the Giving Pledge. So General Atlantic was engaged to invest some of the funds of Mr. Feeney, and it was really interesting when you look at their early trajectory. They really shared Mr. Feeney's philosophy of investing for the long term. Not only investing for the long term, building value over time. And it was interesting, General Atlantic recently rebranded, so I'd gone to their website to just sort of see what the new look and feel was all about. And on the homepage, they really lay out their core guiding principles. And I thought they were so stunning because without any actual conversation, they align so well with Echoing Green. So when you go to their website, you'll see these 5 principles. They talk about their passion for partnering with growth companies. They talk about their patience in pursuing opportunities and building value. They talk about persistence in overcoming obstacles and pursuing growth. They talk about partnership with their investors and their portfolio company teams. And last but not least, performance by delivering value to their portfolio companies and their capital partners. Well, Echoing Green is one of the leading angel investors in young social entrepreneurs. That really is our sort of guiding mantra as well. And it's interesting when you look at the results of General Atlantic, when you just sort of look at the median growth of their 2012 portfolio companies, they yielded a 20% average growth. That's very robust and such a good success metric. And then when you start to dig in, well, why was this model, why did it work so well for General Atlantic and by extension so well for Echoing Green? And I sort of came up with 4 points that I think are relevant. So number one, General Atlantic's modeling of Mr. Feeney's belief in investing deeply in talent, all about the human capital, as you said. Secondly, General Atlantic's example of clearly setting expectations for leadership and achievement that are absolutely matched by the leadership within that firm. When you talk about walking the walk, the General Atlantic guys truly walk the walk. Thirdly, they have done a terrific job as a firm of being very explicit and clearly articulating their firm's core principles. And it's interesting to see how those core principles are bolstered because of the unassailable success metrics that this company has yielded. And then I think last but not least, something we could all learn from, I think they have really brilliantly made the most of the iconography of Mr. Feeney. So when you walk the halls of General Atlantic, when you talk to the General Atlantic folks, when I talk to Echoing Green Fellows, Mr. Feeney's integrity, his decency, his leadership, his entrepreneurial zeal and belief in others really has been infused across all of our organizations, and I think that really has been a powerful sort of inoculation for all of us.
Interesting. I had forgotten about Chuck Feeney. How could
It's
I have
interesting,
forgotten
right?
about
It's
Chuck
right.
Feeney?
I know.
I kept looking it
Yeah.
up and finding it on the website, and who was it? I remembered you, and he's not on the website.
And when you talk to Mr. Feeney, I recommend his biography is called The Billionaire Who Wasn't. And sort of, it's fascinating. And some of the things that many of us, you know, Wendy and I, having been Echoing Green Fellows, I met Mr. Feeney only once. And at the time, it wasn't even clear to me who he was, because for many years, he was the anonymous donor, right? But it's talked about wearing the same Timex watch, only flying coach, not owning a home. And this is a man, and I had lunch with him a couple years ago, and I was so in awe of him and saying, oh, Mr. Feeney. He's like, no, please call me Chuck. So from the way he walks through the world, from the way you interact with him, it is an example of leadership and humility that has impacted a lot of us.
How old is he now?
Mr. Feeney, I think, is about 84. Wow. But again, you feel him through the halls of General Atlantic, and I think to some extent in the work that we do at Echoing Green.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at those ventures that Echoing Green now selects. And it seems that, you know, when you select the nonprofits, then they depend on grants and loans, and that might make them more prone to, I'd say, you know, mission drift, because they're trying to go with the donors, et cetera. But then when you look at those that you're selecting that are structured as, you know, for-profits, you could also make the counter argument that they may well be subjected to mission drift in terms of, you know, looking at how are we really going to meet that bottom line. So what's the experience to date as you've sort of juggled these two different structures in terms of founders' vision and how that's influenced by structures?
Yes, and so a lot of this, you have to remember, as angel investors, we're investing in the entrepreneur. So we're there in the early days, and we give 2 years of cash support, an array of wraparound technical support services. So, you know, I can sort of tell you the metrics of success of Echoing Green as a social impact accelerator. So for example, again, we're a very small micro fund, and we, in the classes of 2011 and 2012, invested about $2.4 million in 58 fellows. Within 2 years of that investment, they've gone on to raise close to $30 million. That's a 12x return in a very short amount of time. And again, these are usually 1 to 5 person shops when we initially invest in them. Within 2 years, their employee base has increased 11-fold. So in the early days, we're a really good early stage accelerator. But when you sort of look out at some of our star alums, like Wendy and Michael Brown and Alan Casey from City Year, and a number of others, I think we see a couple of really interesting things. And quite often, Wendy and Teach for America is an example that we refer back to over and over because of how she successfully scaled. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but one of the things I think TFA and other sort of big youth-serving organizations within our portfolios have gotten right is their refusal to neglect organizational capacity, right? You're sort of mission on the one hand, you're so mission driven, but you also have this initial focus and relentless need to sort of get short-term financial returns to build the enterprise. But sometimes you can end up neglecting that, and part of that is sort of the structural milieu in which we find ourselves where funders don't want to pay for the overhead, right? So I know that's a tension you struggle with at Teach for America, but to see the way you've scaled, always hanging on to the mission, but also not neglecting the organizational capacity, I think is really huge. I also think making explicit as you grow some of the implicit values and beliefs, so that as your team grows and you continue to delegate, that it is very clear to them the TFA way of doing business, the citizen schools way of doing business, becomes something that your staff and colleagues can hang their hat on. Those are very successful examples. It's really too early stage for us to tell with our investments with these double bottom line, triple bottom line businesses. Prior to 2007, we saw no B Corps or double bottom line or triple bottom line businesses. Our one example was our 1998 fellow, Vikram Akula, SKS Microfinance. He applied to us as a nonprofit fellow, and he got investment from us to build SKS as a nonprofit. Did not go for profit until 7 years in, and then went public on India Stock Exchange in 2010 with very difficult results. So that, in many ways, is a cautionary tale, but it has not deterred these millennials who are really trying to tap into the capital markets because they believe in scaling their social enterprises. So TBD, to be determined. We don't know yet.
Fascinating stuff. Really, really interesting. Now, turning to our two founders, Wendy and Andrea. Both of you obviously are, incredibly successful social entrepreneurs, and, but there have been tensions. I mean, I can remember Wendy talking about the dark years at Teach for America, and certainly Riders has expanded more and more into more African countries, and that's, presented its own stresses and strains. So the question I have for both of you, and whoever wants to take it first is great, is, what is the vision that you want your respective organizations to carry through their lifetime? And that really is the essence. And how has that vision changed, if at all, since you basically started that venture? And Wendy, perhaps also a little bit about your vision for, Teach for America and Teach for All, and how are those compatible, or how do those two things mesh? So just throw that out too.
You go. Well, I feel like I have been pursuing really the exact same thing since literally almost 25 years ago to the day when I turned in my undergraduate senior thesis. And, I think even, we all learn obviously a lot from our experience, and I think an understanding of how this plays out and why it's, I think I started out probably not fully even understanding the power of, what I now believe the power is of what we're pursuing. But the big idea, all along has been to say, starting in my own country, but, we should be channeling our most precious resource, our most educated human resources against what I believe is the most fundamental of all issues. Just the fact that, so many kids, just by nature of their socioeconomic background, don't have access to the opportunity to fulfill their true potential. And that's at the root of so many other, societal issues, obviously. So that's really the idea, to go out. And we go out, as maybe and now all these programs in the Teach for All network, 34 now and growing every few months, are calling upon their country's top recent college graduates, young professionals, to commit 2 years to teach in their highest need communities. And they're investing a lot in these folks in pursuit of immediate impacts for the kids that they're reaching, but also knowing that those 2 years will be completely transformational for them. It will change their career trajectories, it will change their priorities, and the long-term idea is to build a leadership force of people who will work from inside of education and from outside of education. Thus the 2-year commitment. We will not solve this problem working from within classrooms alone. Heroic teachers are really crucial for kids growing up today, but they will not be able to affect the truly systemic changes that we need to see ultimately. So we need people working from inside classrooms, running schools, running school systems, improving economic conditions in these communities, improving public health systems, improving social services. And what we're trying to do is to shape the generation of leaders who will take this on from every direction. I didn't view Teach for All. Some people, were disconcerted by my like embrace of this global mission in the U.S. because, of course, the problems in the U.S. are very huge, and we need to get much bigger and much better and work in, obviously collaboration with many more to really gain traction against them. But I viewed it as the most consistent thing in the world. Like, there was something in the water about 9 years ago. I wasn't thinking, oh, I really want to go expand internationally, but within 1 year, I met 13 people, very incredible, inspiring social entrepreneurs, including Shaheen Mistry, who I believe you work with in India, and folks in Lebanon and Chile and the next place who were just determined to launch this same model in their countries and were looking for help. So I thought, and I'm so glad now, because I don't think I realized at the front end of this global effort how powerful it would be. I mean, yes, there are human needs all over the world, but at the same time, just realizing there are also very brilliant minds all over the world. And when you channel their energy against a problem that's very similar in its nature from place to place, in diverse cultures that inspire different ways of thinking, you just hugely accelerate progress. So I feel like, honestly, I mean, what you said, CHERYL, about, I think one of the aspects, I mean, whether you call it a strength or not, of Teach for America and now Teach for All is the focus on the mission and just saying, this is what we do. A lot of people don't think this makes sense. I spend my life saying, no, this is what we do, and trying to get people to understand, which is still pushing a boulder up the hill, our, quote, theory of change, because it's kind of counterintuitive. It counters traditional paradigms around teaching. But I feel like that's all I've done for 25 years is try to help people get it.
What is it people don't get?
Well, the easiest way to explain this, I mean, I wrote this in my last book, but my 8-year-old, I was, at the time, was interviewing me for a school paper, and he was asking me about, Teach for America. And at the end of this thing, I'm walking away, and he's like, I don't get it, Mom. He's like, I mean, you're saying this is such a huge problem, so why would you take people straight out of college and just get them to do this for 2 years? So I'm thinking, my own son doesn't get it. Now I understand, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, there's so much about it that doesn't make sense. There really is, and yet it does make sense if you really understand everything. So anyway, it's, yeah.
But it is what you originally said, which was the Peace Corps model, and that's a 2-year thing, and it changes people's lives completely.
Yeah.
That.
Well, it's complicated because, we've got kids in classrooms and people think, gosh, are these people going to be responsible teachers? I mean, it turns out, yes. I mean, actually, the research shows they are having a very positive impact in these classrooms, even relative to experienced teachers in their schools. But, they're not, it's complicated. This is a complicated problem. One teacher does not fix everything for all of their kids. And so people start thinking, wait, you think 2 years is going to change kids' lives? It's like, well, we need every additional person we can get 2 years and longer to commit themselves to the kids growing up today who have what it takes to meet their extra needs and, go above and beyond traditional expectations and such. But at the same time, it's counterintuitive to say, there's something very deep and transformative about, what after having taught successfully in a low-income community is something very different than you knew before you did that. You learn so much about what is possible for kids and about what it takes to meet their extra needs. And it's that insight and that conviction and that sense of possibility and the outrage about the current situation that fuels a lifetime of leadership. Those are the people who, working alongside many others, obviously, will go out, as they've done in the US and in the UK and already starting to do in India and Chile and the places where these programs are only 5 years old, but they do pioneer the future. Again, working alongside many, many others. But
Andrea, it's been really wonderful to watch Riders for Health sort of grow from what Barry calls, we just change oil filters, to this amazing organization. But you guys have had your struggles too in terms of how that vision keeps getting transformed as you go from country to country to country. How do you do it?
Well, excuse me. I think that what what we started out with was, and as Wendy says, it's you have day to day, even over our 25 years, you have a feeling of outrage. And I think that's one of the things about founders of social enterprises, that it is the situation is so unreasonable, and you just cannot see why it has to remain that way. And I think that is a fundamental something that you find in every social entrepreneur. So our outrage was really centered around the way that vehicles are used in Africa, in rural areas, the huge waste of money of people buying vehicles, investing in vehicles, and nobody being trained to manage them, not understanding the supply chain and all those. So one is the waste of money. One is here's an opportunity to train a lot of local people to be highly skilled in a very, artisan, around an artisan issue of maintenance and apprenticeships and all those things, so give people jobs and build the capacity and skills in a country on which actually a continent is built. It's built on very basic, things like plumbers and mechanics and all that. So it's about that. And then just the huge waste of life that if you don't maintain a vehicle, you're simply not going to be able to get out to your rural communities. It's waste of money, but much worse, a waste of life. And so if you don't have, there's another really key thing about maintaining vehicles. If you have a health worker who can use a vehicle that is well maintained, she can be predictable. And predictability for rural communities in terms of healthcare is hugely important, because they don't know when they're coming, they don't know what they're bringing, they just don't know anything, and they feel very isolated. So just that mechanical tool, if you like, the vehicle, and maintaining it is a real key. So those are the principles around principal issues that we've built Riders for Health upon. And one of the things I keep on saying really is that those things are really boring. That they're really boring. Who's interested really in maintaining vehicles? And as Barry says, oil filters. Well, nobody, but they're absolutely vital. Mm-hmm. And actually maintenance is a big issue. People are always talking about sustainable development and using technology. If you're going to use technology, you have to have maintenance or a replacement plan. So, and that's not present in African development. It isn't in the big NGOs, and it isn't in government. So it's a big mind-changing issue. And I think that is another point about founders, that they're not just interested in doing the job. They're interested in changing the minds and how government thinks, how you change the status quo. And if you're going to do that, you've got to be energetic, tireless, and unreasonable, as you've so often said. And we are all unreasonable. Or
we know.
We have suffered. But I do also think that if you don't think about the money, where money integrates with this, you can't go anywhere either. So it's really strange when Barry and I first started Riders, we certainly didn't come from a development background. We had, I'd been a motorcycle racer and a PR person in sport, and he was a lawyer and a journalist. I mean, we just didn't know anything about African development, but we just looked at it and thought, this can't be right. But you have to think about how money is going to work in that environment. And actually with NGOs, you often find that talking about money is a little bit vulgar, don't mention the money. But you've got to do it, and you've got to make it work really, really hard, and you've got to make it appropriate to that environment, just in the same way that we're creating an infrastructure to manage vehicles where there is no infrastructure for managing vehicles. There are no roads, no service stations, no Jiffy Lube on every corner. There just isn't that infrastructure. So how do you do that without making a mirror image of what works out there, what works, in terms of the infrastructure? So how does money work in that environment? How do you make the money appropriate where there is no money that's focused on that particular thing? So I think that those are the really core things. But one of the things that you say there about stresses and strains is just how slow everything is. And time, that slowness of changing minds, getting people to change their minds, it costs money. And you have to somehow find the money to pay for the time it takes to do those things. So the money always creates tensions, and I know Bart and I were talking from Popo, were talking the other day about founders of social enterprises, and what we do is figure out all the time how you manage to be in a survival mode on a constant basis, because you can never go and say, yeah, we're really, we're making money here, and we're, because that doesn't happen. But the other thing I think has to be remembered about founders of social enterprises, that people are always saying, how do you continue to innovate? Yes, you've got to continue to innovate. We've come up with a financial model in the Gambia that where we've got a commercial bank, GT Bank, to pay for the vehicles, leasing them to the Gambian Ministry of Health. But actually there is none of us, there is nobody. Wendy's organisations are 25 years old. That is still an innovation. It's not a done deal. Managing vehicles in rural communities in Africa is still an innovation. And you mustn't forget that. I don't mean you mustn't. I mean, we must all, because you get so used to your own innovation that you feel it's kind of, oh, well, that's done. It's not, it's an innovation. So that's...
Now, let me ask each one of you, because the interesting thing about working in social entrepreneurship, or certainly, in companies like the Tatas and the Mars, et cetera, there's a certain celebrity status that is conferred on all of you. And Ram, you talked a little bit about all of a sudden I have to face these thousands of shareholders. How does that help each one of you advance your mission or detract from it, or actually help you with succession planning? Because a lot of times what happens is the founder is larger than life, and who's going to want to follow in their footsteps? So talk a little bit about how this mix between celebrity status as the founder, or people at the helm of these organizations, mixes with advancing your mission, with identifying somebody who's going to follow in those footsteps. I mean, it's sort of a convoluted question, but it does occur to me that there's something there.
I mean, you do become the sort of face of the organization. Right. People associate you with that organization and that mission. And I think that's hard for people coming along behind you. But on the other hand, corporations or individuals who want to fund your organization or invest in your organization will do so much more happily, because they have heard about you and they feel reassured by that, however you call that, that sort of celebrity status. But what I think people have to realize about founders is that they're really good at something. They're really, really good, but we're not good at everything. Right. So we need really good people to come along and do all the things we're not good at. And for those people to figure out, what is it these people, these founders, in the case of me and Barry, he's there in the middle of the room, what are these people really good at? What do we need to keep them for? And what do we really need them to keep their noses out of? So I just think you have to collaborate with your colleagues and figure out with them as an area of trust what it is. What are you going to continue to bring to this? And what do you really, not need to bother with? So I think it's an iteration and as people say, a journey. So what do you think?
All of us must first institutionalize. An institution is bigger than any individual. If you do not get that right, you'll never find a successor who is better than you, or who is capable of driving the future better than you, than what you have done so far. It's a responsibility each and every one of us carry as a professional. And professional well-being of an institution should be of paramount importance. And we keep playing that again and again, so that for every single senior level position in the company, there is already a successor who's waiting to take over, because God forbid if somebody meets with an accident and you need to find that position, you got to be prepared for that. You cannot be in a firefighting mode at that point in time. Second is, when you retire or when you leave that position, if you have a bigger opportunity to do something in the social sector, that's a challenge which enables you to do something phenomenal. The kind of problem I'm addressing for the country today through the National Skill Development Agency is to skill 500 million youth of India, 500 million over the next 10 years, which includes kids from the primary, secondary, and then the vocational education. How do you integrate the general education and the vocational education together and then give pathways for people to go from vocational education to the general education? 12 to 15 million kids come out of the colleges or the schools or whatever it is, and they want a job at the end of the day. If you cannot create the empowerment to create an entrepreneur or an employment, then you are not going to solve a problem, and you are having social impact, social implications across the world. I think when you have a scale problem like that and you get an opportunity to do it, and the Prime Minister of the country calls you and says that, would you like this problem or you want to handle this problem, you're not going to say no, even though you know it's going to be very difficult. Then what do? You involve people from across.
Right.
And that's where things like Teach for India is all important, because it's very, very important, a collaboration that needs to be put in place. The question you asked saying that why people don't get it. I mean, Shahin Mistry and Anu Aga came to me and said, we want to meet the Minister for Human Resource Development. I said, I'll take you to them. We went to meet them. We explained if a person has done from TCS as a volunteer for 2 years, and then they serve teaching and the kids are so happy, the schools are so happy, and this professional says, I don't want to come back to TCS, I want to continue on the teaching. A simple role, because you don't have a Bachelor of Education degree, does not permit he or she to become a teacher. It's a useless law. You don't get it. Here is a person who is very passionate about teaching, and you are telling us some rule book to say that he or she cannot teach. We don't get it.
So what happened? Did
These
you
are
change
some
the law?
things. No, we'll continue to fight the law, but then you come back, bring them back for 3 months and say, go back for 2 years. We bypass the law that way. You come back to the corporate and then go and start again teaching in another school. That's okay.
Wendy, how has your celebrity status helped Teach for America and Teach for All?
Well, first of all, I, as maybe some people know, moved out of a full-time role at Teach for America a year ago now, almost exactly. And we have elevated new leadership for Teach for America with co-CEOs who, have been working with Teach for America for about a decade each. And I'm now fully focused on Teach for All. And I was actually, I've been thinking about this because Teach for All is a bit of a throwback, right? Like, it is a tiny organization in a way. I mean, it's a startup. We're 7 years in, but it still feels like we're really in the early days of what has, huge potential. And I think about your question, not so much around the celebrity status, but more around, like, if you've been doing this work for 25 years, you owe a lot of people a lot of stuff, because you've been asking for a lot of help. And you have a lot of responsibilities, and there are just things that come along with, the roles that we've all been holding. And here I am at this startup thinking there are huge pressing needs, and one of them being financial, because my new line is, we are ahead of our time. There are only so many philanthropists out there who really think it makes a lot of sense to take a global approach to thinking about addressing educational inequity. I mean, people are very locally focused when it comes to education. So we're pushing a boulder up a hill and trying to amass the resources. And I'm sitting here thinking, my time is, too much of my time is being spent meeting just obligations that come along with 25 years of being in this work.
Right.
And I hope we don't fall apart in the meantime while I go give that speech or whatever.
Right.
So you just try to translate
Exactly.
the responsibility into opportunities to actually, I think every single day, I feel like this is one of the big things,
Exactly.
like, just how do I spend as much of my time as possible on the things I actually need to be spending my time on in order to build the institution and movement that I know we have the potential to
We
become.
might have to live till we're 150.
Yeah, looks like we're going there. Cheryl, anything to add there?
I'll just answer the question maybe slightly differently, because like Skoll, our organization is a community of
Right.
founders, a community of social entrepreneurs. And we do hear the critique, and in some cases, rightly so, of sort of the hero worship, the celebrity culture of this work. But for those of us who work with this extraordinary community of folks, you never discount the power of heroes and legends.
Right.
The narrative power of these individuals to inspire, to motivate, to bring people in community with one another is just priceless. So I think there's something very powerful about that. And the last thing I would say is, again, in preparing for this session, I sort of looked at my executive team. We're a small executive team. There are only 5 of us. But when I look how we all came to the work, there was a deeply personal connection to Echoing Green and the Echoing Green Fellow. So I was funded by Echoing Green in 1992 to start my social enterprise. It was a transformative experience for me. My senior vice president ran another awards program for younger people, and many of the finalists that she worked with had been Echoing Green Fellows. So she saw the power of these young folks. My vice president of fellowship programs, and he won't mind me saying this because it's on our website, was not a 1, but a 2-time unsuccessful applicant to Echoing Green's fellowship program. So went through the process, but also, and I don't even know if you know this, worked briefly for Teach for America and City Year, so had experienced the power of these social enterprises. And my director of finance had spent many years working with one of my longest serving board members when she was a top official in the Peace Corps. So I'd heard her sort of talk about this organization and our ethos and our work. So there's something about that connection to story, to the narrative that really is inspiring and very motivating.
I'd like to open the floor and for questions, comments, shared, and when you do get the mic, please introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what organization you're coming from.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Alicia Miranda. I'm at the Thomson Reuters Foundation. I have never founded anything, but have always been very attracted to organizations with strong founders in place, and certainly as a board member or a volunteer have been involved. And I think sometimes you get brought in this quest for new ideas or new blood, fresh ideas kind of thing, and then there can be a tension with people who have been there and dedicated their lives to starting an organization, and then new people kind of coming in. So I'd like to know from the panel what the rest of us who are working with you in some capacity, what if you could say one thing to the people that sort of come in these circumstances, how would you advise us to work with you, to work with the organization, because I think it can be really challenging and sometimes a bit intimidating.
As a board member and as a staff member?
I've only worked for big companies, so I've never been with founders in that respect, but I'm on the board of several kind of social enterprises where the founders are still there, they're still working, they're incredible organizations, but you do sometimes wonder why are the rest of us really here, because they seem to be leading by such strong example,
Right.
very strong personalities,
Good
that
point.
kind of thing.
Good point.
So I'd just like, if I was having this conversation
Yeah.
over again, what would you tell the people that you're bringing in to kind of add to your organization, how you'd like them to work with you and contribute?
I know what I would say. I wouldn't put the question to you. I'd put it to the founders. I'd say, are you going to listen to me or not? Because, we are used to kind of, we're all those kind of people. We're really kind of strong thinkers and so on. And that you have to be if you're going to do that sort of thing. So, but I think it's a question much less for you than for us. I think we have to learn how to listen and what is a good idea and how to encourage people who are willing to ask the question. And one of the questions I ask people who are coming into our organization in an interview is, how are you going to say no to the founders? And because I want to know what their answer would be to that. But I think we've got to learn that there's so much that we have to learn and listen to.
Anybody else?
I think one of the things we learned early was the board representation of the company was nothing more than a founder has 1 vote, and equal opportunity for every single board member were from outside. So the founder is just another professional in the board. That's the way he or she we drove, so that we kept them away from any decision making other than in the board, which was an independent decision.
I think there are different kinds of founders too. I mean, I think there truly, I mean, Teach for America would never be a $350 million organization with 11,000 teachers and 33,000 alums if one person was doing this work. This has been about finding good people and empowering them to go out and innovate. And Teach for All would only exist through that model. So I think there are different, I wouldn't typecast and start getting a complex about, oh my gosh, this person's a founder. Because the only way we can grow and scale is to have good people, you know, really deeply critically thinking, challenging things and pushing things forward and innovating.
Cheryl?
I mean, the only thing I would add, there's a terrific New York Times interview that I had read not too long ago. CEO of a company called Cognizant. It's a big information technology company started by a guy named Francisco de Souza. And he talked about his leadership trajectory and talked about having both blind spots and comfort zones. And it was a good touchstone for me because as founders, you do have blind spots. And in part, that makes folks really good leaders, visionaries. You can sort of tune things out. But on the flip side, it can also be a problem. So sort of opening yourself up to the kind of 360 feedback, intaking information that makes you uncomfortable, I think is a really important lesson for founders who are both so relentless and dogged that makes them amazing, but who also, to grow and to evolve, have got to be sort of uncomfortable pressure testing those blind spots.
Yes, over here. Gentleman with the bow tie.
I'm Bill Newcomb from the World Justice Project. We're a toddler, 7 years old, and our job is to promote the rule of law all around the world because we believe it is the foundation for communities of opportunity and equity. Come to our panel on Friday, 10 o'clock if you want to learn more. I'm very curious to know how you two founders, who've been very successful doing critically important work, how, if you do, you balance relentlessly improving the efficiency and the productivity of your core competence, your key mission, against internal and external ideas for new initiatives. Things that you might have the ability to do that might seem to be aligned with your core principles and mission. Scale can be just throwing more resources at what you do. Scale can be doing other kinds of things as well. And I'm really eager to learn from you how you balance that. I think very, very challenging sort of attention as you grow, or as you go forward, whether you grow your enterprise or not. Thanks.
You know, I feel that Teach for America's strength, and really this plays itself out in our work at Teach for All in a deep and probably more central than any other thing. I think our strength has been, you know, really deeply understanding our particular theory of change and evaluating everything against that. You know, the fact is to actually fulfill our theory of change, which is basically what I laid out before, like, you know, getting, you know, it's like getting folks into classrooms, and that's the foundational experience for a lifetime of leadership. Fulfilling that takes doing things differently and better, and, you know, adding on new initiatives, you know, lots of things, like, because to truly fulfill that purpose, you've got to figure out, okay, how do we get as many as possible people to do this? So it is about scale. How do we ensure that they're successful as teachers in classrooms? Because if they're not successful, it's not as good for kids, and they won't learn all the right lessons. And that takes, you know, no one knows how to do that successfully. So, you know, and then it takes figuring out how do we, you know, maximize their impact through leadership. How do we accelerate their path to leadership? So that can be everything from helping like whole new initiatives to train and support people to run for elected office or to become school leaders or to run school systems or whatever. So there's a tremendous amount to be done. There are probably 100 ideas we haven't even thought of that will be pursued, you know, in various, you know, but really deeply assessing everything based on, you know, is this truly, because I cannot tell you, when I said earlier, I've spent 25 years saying no, to this day, I'm sure that before the day is out, I will go into a meeting where someone will say, you know what, I have a better idea. Instead of, like, can you retrain the government teachers? Can you, I mean, there are so many things to be done in this world, and people have their own assessment about where the value is. So I don't know, I think we have to all be super clear on what our theory of change is, and be sure that every single thing we do and all the people we work with and all of our supporters deeply understand that and are making decisions based on it. It's actually the core of our work. Is we work to help build the capacity of all these Teach for All network organizations around the world. Project one is really strategic clarity, what we, like making sure everyone truly understands the theory of change and really feels empowered to make decisions based on that.
Andrea.
I'll try and keep it really short. I think that's one of the, Pamela said earlier about, you know, is that there's another issue for Riders for Health, because we're husband and wife who started it and continue still to be there. And of course it's, you know, most days we nearly kill each other, you know, but that we call that a useful tension.
I'll remember that one the next time I fight with my husband.
It's very empowering. But I do think that you have the equivalent of that in successful organisations, that Barry's always been the person who's really been looking at what we now call the product, as you were saying, the thing that you do. What is it you're actually doing, and how do you maintain the quality, and how do you, in our case, make sure that the people who run our programs in Africa are really doing that and are empowered to do it, but also given the skills and training that we're recognizing talent and all those kinds of things. And that with his the people he's mentoring and teaching is what really keeps that part strong. But then on the other side, I've always been the person who's looking much more at the sort of landscape, where do we fit in the sort of where this goes, and thinking about new kinds of money and the sort of advocacy, if you like, talking much more about transport for Africa rather than almost in a way Riders for Health. So I think that every organisation, and small one like ours, gradually has a similar thing, that there's somebody looking at that and somebody looking at this, and bringing those two things together. I wouldn't recommend the husband and wife thing, but
You know, what I'm going to do is take several questions, because I know there are lots of them. Let's, Katinka, why don't you just pose a question and we'll just get a couple.
Thank you. Katinka, investing in social entrepreneurs in Norway. And I would like to hear your views on when you have this successful social entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur either wants to or should step down from the leadership role because he or she is tremendous, great visions, everything, but not able to really grow the company. How do you do that when a founder is really strong and visible? How do you practically take the visions and the values and keep it inside the social enterprise? Some reflections on that, please.
For you too. Back there, all the way back there, yes. Let's go all the way back. Make sure we get people in the back.
Hi, this is Joseph Ajao. I'm a young leader and co-founder of Oaksoft Technologies. We build low-cost software for SMEs back in Nigeria. I was fortunate enough to be a 2012 Echoing Green finalist. I mean, I didn't get it, but I don't know if you remember my face. Yeah, and I wanted to ask a question about, I mean, for everyone on the panel, how do you manage the conflict of interest that exists within your organization, so between your members of your board and other stakeholders? So if you have an investor do you usually have investors who are just interested in the returns and not really about the impact or the amount of social impact your entrepreneurs are going to make? Do you have that kind of interest among members of your board and other stakeholders within your organization, and how do you manage that conflict of interest?
Okay, let's take one more, and then way back there.
Hi, my name is Eugenie Fitzgerald, and I have the privilege of working inside or running an organization that has not one but two founders. we have the initial founder and then a nonprofit founder who bought the company. She runs a nonprofit that was inspired by it. So I'm thrilled to see a panel that has both people who are in somewhat my role and then two founders. And my question for the founders, Wendy, I appreciated what you said about there's different types of founders, and I kind of want to dig at that. So for both of the founders, did you start out with the clarity that you need to empower people and that you need to have a clear vision in order to go from a kitchen table to 350 million, et cetera, or is that something that you grew over time? And if that is a position that you sort of grew into over time, what supported that growth? What were the milestones? Where were the openings? Where did you start and how did you get there? And how do folks like myself support founders in that growth, connecting their vision with the systems that you need in order to get there?
Great.
Thank you.
So why don't we start first with the question back there in terms of how do you deal with the conflict of interest that might arise? Because that was a question for all of you, so let's keep that brief. No conflict of interest, yeah.
Very quickly, more related to the work we do in impact investing as more of these for-profit or hybrid enterprises are part of our deal flow. There is a difference between disclosure and transparency and conflict of interest. So always full disclosure, transparency is always the best thing from a governance perspective. But Echoing Green has really been very clear on having a very strong firewall between the financial returns that may accrue to these businesses and being a social impact first funder. We take no stake in the social enterprises. We work very closely with some follow-on impact investing funds, but there's a clear firewall. They cannot be involved in due diligence or deliberations, so we keep that separate. So that's, and currently funded fellows, we dissuade our board from investing in them. But as former fellows and alums, that's great.
Anybody else want to? Yep.
I think one is the vision of the founder itself with regard to involving the stakeholders and not just the owners themselves. Second is you disseminate it very transparently. One is the economic viability, which is the profit and loss, viability statements, profits, etc., etc. In addition to that, we also bring in concepts like ecological sustainability. How is the land usage? How is the carbon emission? How is the water usage? How is the waste disposal, etc. And we want to make it as a part of disclosure itself as public as anything else. Then the whole corporate social responsibility index, where what are you doing for the community? If you claim that your founder has said that we are there for the community, not for just profit making, show by results or show by impact on the ground. When we say in education, we are talking about impacting 15 million children, which means touching about 1 million schools. And to create this kind of a bigger vision, which is the vision of the founder or the successors, every organization aligns to this kind of a vision and bring in the core competencies of every single company that forms a part of the group. So the alignment is through this reinforcing of these statements, but more importantly, public disclosures where the accountability is beyond economic accountability.
Any comments? Let's go to Katinka's question about what do we do when we need to get rid of the founder?
I'll say one thing in relation to both of these two questions. I mean, I'm not going to exactly answer that question, but I have a little thing pasted on my board that I've discovered like 12 years ago, which is an analysis that shows that founder-led companies are more profitable than those where they've kicked the founder out. And I think the reason that I found that to be such a precious piece was that for many years, people in their right mind would look at Teach for America and conclude this woman does not know what she is doing and really probably should be replaced. I probably would have been if people could have found the replacement. And if I could have found the replacement, I probably would have happily turned it over at points, actually. But it's just to say, I really, and most of the founders I know, I really was just thinking about, most of the founders I know care first and foremost about the impact that they're having. They are truly trying. This is not like a pursuit of glory. These are people trying to make a real impact. And, it's hard. And I myself did not start with the experience to know how to do this, how to build a team, how to empower others, how to manage on a significant scale. I knew very little. But I did want to have a significant impact. And I think, and I was willing to go through the growth journey, not seeing the alternative, like, you know, MBA who could come in and take it over, which was the suggestion many people gave me in our second or third or fourth year. You know, so that's one thing I would say. And in terms of, you know, so it's not to say that no founder should be replaced, but just that I do think there's some, and I even see it at Teach for All, where we've got now 34 founder-led enterprises. And, you know, there's something about like deep understanding of the core mission and values that these folks bring. So if you can help them along the growth curve so that they can be the ones to lead it forward, complement them through bringing in, helping them find the people who will complement them, coaching, you know, the various leadership development and kind of training experiences that really can be real breakthroughs for folks. I would say, you know, invest in those founders before you give up on them. And the last thing I'll just say, I mean, there's so much probably to this question, but one thing I've recently discovered, and I wish I'd discovered it a long time ago, is just the incredible power of a good coach. I mean, I'm shocked. I mean, if I had had a coach like I have now, I've somehow found myself with a coach who is just incredible. And it's amazing what she does to just help you step back, reflect, and progress in a better way. And I just think about, wow, like if I'm getting this much out of this at this point, you know, what would I have gotten out of it, you know, way back when? And I just think, you know, I've discovered that this is a thriving thing in the corporate world, coaching. I mean, and we need to embrace that, I think, in a bigger way than I've seen it embraced, at least in the social enterprise community.
I just want to quickly go to Eugenie's question.
May I just very quickly ask, just say, you need to ask what you're trying, what's the mission of this organization, and why do you feel that person has to be moved along? And I'd really like to know if they're not aligned, if that's the problem, or if they just need more skill, or and I agree with Wendy that they either need more help, or you need to have a really serious discussion about the unalignment of the mission and the skills, what they bring.
Can I just add quickly? So there's some dated research, but still interesting, that usually after a founder leaves, the successor, the immediate successor, lasts less than 2 years, usually about 18 months. So that transition is tough. That's the first thing. The second thing is every founder, executive director, et cetera, should have a succession plan on their shelf today.
Right.
And you sort of clean it up, but that is vital, and none of us do it. That's the second thing, right? And then last but not least, oh, fabulous, bravo. Last but not least, there are firms and companies that actually work on transition plans, and there's an alumni organization in our portfolio, Public Allies. Paul Schmitz, the longtime CEO, is stepping down, and he is working with a company on his transition plan. Most CEOs think they can do it alone. No, there are good supports and wraparound services that really can come into play, and just sort of watching him go through it, it's been invaluable. So.
Right. Just want to get to Eugenie's question. Any of you have insights for her? Andrea?
I can't remember what the question was.
Okay,
really
very
sorry.
quickly, Eugenie, can you just recap very quickly? We've run out of time.
Sure. Where have you successfully grown as a founder that enabled you to go from a kitchen table to a 350 million or, you know, large operation? How did you open up?
Yeah, it's a similar answer actually to Wendy's, that you know, you can't categorize founders. I mean, it's interesting because Barry and I are both founders, but we definitely have different approaches to how we do our work. And I do think you have to be really open to thinking of new things and different ways of applying what's available out there to your organization. And I just think it does depend on the founder and what they're trying to do. I mean, I'd be happy to talk about it on email if that would be helpful to you.
I'd just say every founder I know is desperately looking for help.
That's true.
And it may seem that they're being defensive or resistant, but that may be, just if you really dive in and try to understand what it is that they're struggling with, I actually never had a trouble giving anything up if I had the right person to give it up to. I was desperately looking, who can I turn all these problems over to? So most people, I think about every founder I know, I mean, it's the same thing. So I really think, and I think the coaching methodology, it sort of starts there, like truly, and I think much of the advice I got in those early years was from people who came in thinking, this woman doesn't know what she's doing, and they would come in and sort of, and I would be like, okay, but I got to keep this thing afloat tomorrow. So, none of that advice is going to help me out, and I'd go back to my old ways. But I think we have to approach it more from like, really, what are the needs and what's the situation, and with the belief that people can grow.
Rand, do you have anything there?
No, I think we created a technology platform to connect about 12,000 employees in real time for about a week. We got almost 400 suggestions for improvement. I don't think any founder can afford to ignore it, or any CEO can afford to ignore it. And we implemented almost 100 suggestions, which operationally improved and the efficiency, and the result, the money that was available for spending on anything which we wanted to do. So I think we must be very open to interactions. We must not discount because he's a new employee or she's a new employee who has just joined. As a professional, everybody has a responsibility, and we must be very open to listening. And one of the greatest necessities for any leader or any founder is if they lose their listening power, they're only going to repent later on rather than get the success out for social impact.
Cheryl, do you have any concluding thoughts, words of wisdom?
No, and I can't underscore Wendy's point about the importance of coaching. You see it all the time in the corporate world. And I remember reading an article, Vanity Fair had interviewed the founder of Zynga. And he says, I started this company and I realized sort of the power of coaching. He says, I had a tennis instructor. When I wanted to learn how to ski, I had a skiing instructor. Why in the world wouldn't I have that same sort of wraparound support for the thing that I love most, this business? So I do think that's incredibly important, and we in the nonprofit world who are so constrained financially don't think about that investment, and I just say here, that I think that's so important.
Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Great, that was wonderful. Thank you. Thanks very much.